Again, my name is Darren McAvoy. I'm an Extension Forestry Associate here at Utah State University. I've been practicing forestry for all of my career, the last 20 or 30 years. Fair bit of background in fire and helping private landowners private landowners manage their family forest land. That wasn't easy to say. But at a previous webcast, it was suggested in our evaluations, we will be sending you an evaluation website here today after the program, and we appreciate all your feedback on those. That's what directs our future programming often. As in this case, this title came from a previous webcast evaluation where they thought it would be good to find out what a landowner could do themselves without hiring a logger, because for most landowners, having a logger or other contractor working on your land, it's a pretty rare event. The question is what you can do yourself without the help of a logger or a forester or other contractor. So this presentation is about some tips to help you to continue the active stewardship of your property with simple tools that most landowners would have around the house or around the ranch, and that they can use themselves. During this webcast, I will cover these 10 subjects: property boundary maintenance, hazard tree assessment and removal, insect and disease control, weed control, fuel breaks, slash disposal, riparian restoration, road maintenance, tree planting, and permits and regulations. In each of these topics, I'll introduce these topic areas, and try to point you towards other resources for more information to aid in your understanding of these ideas and their implementation. I think each of the points that I'll bring up could probably merit its own webcast and discussion, which time won't allow for today. So it'll be more of an introductory thing, and if you'd like more information beyond the resources I will be pointing you towards, please send me an email or give me a call. The last slide of today's presentation will feature my contact information. Thanks again, everybody, for coming and introducing yourselves through the chat pod. It's good to know what kind of landowners we got. We've got Weston with 21 acres of oak, aspen, and maples and fir near Eden. A beautiful place. Property boundary maintenance. I'd like to start by thanking Doug Page for this slide. This is a picture of a creative way to mark your property boundaries. This Utah landowner looks like a cut-off chunk of a barrel and had it nailed to trees all along his property boundary, indicating the direction the property boundary was going. More often we'll use flagging, like on this aspen tree down below this piece of barrel, to indicate property lines in many cases. And it's always a good idea to define those property boundaries of what you own and try to maintain them through time. If you're sure of where your property lines are, it's really a good idea to go ahead and keep them maintained over time. Keep the paint fresh and the flagging fresh. Over time, the paint wears away and the flagging falls off. Typically, it's a standard convention to use vertical stripes on the trees along the edge of the property boundary to show where the property boundary is. And for this one, you could almost, if you could picture a fence going through the center of the tree there and on and beyond and coming back at you, that's the direction the property boundary would be running according to those vertical stripes. And very often for other forestry purposes like tree harvesting, we tend to use more horizontal stripes, which is not as a standard accepted convention for marking along property boundaries. Once property boundaries are lost, they're very difficult to recover and often require hiring a surveyor at considerable expense to get that done. So it's a good idea to keep them tidy, keep them maintained. If you know where your corners are, it's a good idea to monument them with a pile of rocks. I think this pile of rocks is more likely to indicate where this trail is, but it's the same sort of thing. If you know where your corner is, even if it's out in the forest, a big pile of rocks can be a useful way and long-term way to mark those corners. Often as a forester, if I'm looking for corners, that's one of the things I'm looking for, is an old pile of rocks in a spot. As a more modern techniques would be to use flagging and paint in those corners, use lots of it, really make them show up so that folks can find them, and perhaps a logger on an adjacent property isn't confused and knows exactly where it is. And this whole webcast is about do-it-yourself tips, so I thought I'd share the story of the ultimate do-it-yourself landowners I ran into one day, at least from my perspective, as I was consulting in northern Idaho. This couple had a little 10-acre parcel, and as we were there talking to them, they were actually digging their own well. They had this set up with ropes going way up into the treetops and pulleys attached way down on one end to the bumper of their pickup and the other end into an auger, a little hand auger, and a shovelful at a time. They were digging their own well by driving the pickup back and forth, and the pulleys would bring the auger in and out of the 60-foot hole. So I'm not recommending that, but tell this story about them because also it was their property boundary maintenance that is another one that stood out. They didn't have compasses or string machines or any of the standard things we use in forestry for laying out property boundaries. So each couple went to each corner on a 10-acre parcel. They knew where the corners were, and to find each other through the woods, thick trees, they each had a big pot and a pan in each hand, and they would just walk towards each other, banging the pots and pans as loud as possible and hanging flagging as they went. Well, as it turned out, another forester and I were laying out that property line just a couple of weeks later with our compasses and all our best equipment at the time, and they were only within they were never more than 5 or 10 feet off the whole way. It was pretty amazing, and it was kind of neat to see how they did that. So there's a story about the ultimate do-it-yourself landowners. Another topic we came up with as far as doing it yourself and taking care of your own property, it's important to consider hazard tree assessment and removal. A hazard tree is one that is threatening a picnic site, a home, a place that you frequent in the forest. Could even be a corner of two roads or trails. This is an extreme case of hazard tree removal in this photograph from Navajo Lake down by Cedar City during or just after the big spruce beetle invasion, and the spruce beetles had killed most of the spruce, large diameter old growth spruce in this campground, and the Forest Service, for liability reasons, had to remove every dead spruce tree within the campground. So these poor folks are sort of camped out amongst the stumps. So that's kind of an extreme case of hazard tree removal. More often it's just a single tree, and if it's a tree that looks like this and it's right over your picnic table that you like to frequent, then I suggest consider having it removed or removing it yourself. There's a lot of danger in removing hazard trees. It's often a good idea to have a professional come in and do that, or if you have equipment, a large tractor or something, you can more safely push over trees like this. Often loggers will just use their equipment to push over a piece of a hazard tree like this so you don't threaten a person underneath it with a chainsaw. So the general rule of thumb with hazard trees is remove the tree or remove the target. If your picnic table is right underneath this tree, it may be easier just to consider moving your picnic table. But if it's in a special place, or if it's along a walkway or a roadway, dead and dying trees, you should consider having them removed. Again, consider seeking professional help from an arborist or a forester. There's lots of information on the web on how to fall a tree. I would probably start with Oregon State Extension Service for good fact sheets on how to do that yourself, safe ways. But when you get into hazard trees, things get much trickier, and it's a good idea to have a professional on hand. This is a less obvious indicator of a hazard tree, a big old stout tree, certainly Douglas fir, but this conch here in the middle, this fruiting body, is fungus, it's a quinine conch, I believe, is an indicator of interior rot in the tree. So when we see fruiting bodies like this on this Douglas fir, or this one on this this white fir, it's a pretty clear indicator this tree is rotten on the inside and needs to come down. Again, ideally by a licensed professional or a big piece of equipment. This is an aspen tree with obvious diseases in it. Again, if it's right next to your cabin, if it's out in the woods by itself, it's fine. But if it's right next to your cabin, walkway, picnic table, or such, please consider removing it. Insect and disease control. I want you to have a little discussion on what you can do and what you can't do, what's practical. If this is what your neighbor's property is looking like, this is Forest Service property, and a spruce beetle invasion is upon you, there's very little you can do to control spruce beetle in this instance, or if this was lodgepole and a invasion of this extent, there's very little a landowner right next door could do to protect their own trees. With lodgepole, perhaps spraying individual trees, real high value trees in front of the cabin, or the most important trees could be considered, but it's difficult and expensive, and it's a pretty tough battle when insect populations come up this high. However, when insect populations are not quite as extreme as this, there's a lot a landowner can do. This is a project on private land in Sundance, where with the help of the Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands, they were working to control Douglas fir beetle by placing these pheromone packets on this, you can see on this aspen tree on the left. Doesn't matter what kind of tree the packet is attached to, just as long as it's in the neighborhood of these Douglas fir that you're trying to protect. And here this person is just helping to use a staple gun to attach the pheromone packs up to the tree. You can see that on the picture on the left there's different kinds of pheromone packs. It's just because there were different years. It's an ongoing project over several years to protect some of the Douglas fir at the bottom of Sundance. So with the help of people like Colleen Kais, the forest health specialist at the Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands, private landowners can do quite a bit as far as controlling bark beetles when they're at endemic or lower levels. Another thing that landowners can do with bark beetles at endemic levels or lower levels, when the population hasn't just gone through the roof, is a trap tree setup, where you go in and you fall a couple of host species trees at a certain time of year, and allow that, before the summer, for example, allow the beetles will be invited into that tree because it still has a lot of life in it, and they'll colonize the tree, thinking that it's still alive, and then during that winter you can either remove the tree, thereby removing the beetles, or, as in this picture, using this special tool to debark the tree, again ruining the beetles' habitat and home, so they die in this process. So another example of the kinds of things with some professional assistance that a landowner can do to help control bark beetles on their property. This is the trap tree approach. Here in this picture is of a branch of lodgepole pine. Is this other growth coming out of that are not needles coming out of the branch are the plants of a dwarf mistletoe. This is a parasitic seed plant that grows in lodgepole and Douglas fir and sometimes in ponderosa. I don't see that much of that in Utah, but lots of lodgepole, Douglas fir, and ponderosa and lodgepole and Douglas fir mistletoes in Utah. They don't cross between each species of tree, but if you have it in one species of tree, it will go from tree to tree within your property. This is the up-close version, or what it looks like when it's actually growing out of the tree. But what you more often notice, like in this lodgepole, is just a clump of branches or a witch's broom that grows. And a landowner can go and cut these branches out if they're not too inaccessible, too high up in the tree. If a tree is completely loaded with them, then it's too gone. It's probably best to remove that tree so it reduces its ability to infect other trees. But if a tree is lightly infected, especially lower down branches, these branches can be removed in an effort to at least slow down the spread of mistletoe on their property. Just a word of caution, these are Ips beetles in a log that was left after a logging operation down by Electric Lake, and you need to be cautious about leaving large diameter woody material out in the forest during certain times of year, because it can actually invite beetles into your forest. And these Ips can go from these dead, recently dead cut pieces up into the tops of other trees, live healthy trees, and start to damage those trees. So good to have some advice on leaving large diameter material in the woods. Best to get it out of the woods, buck it up, make sure it dries out quickly. Weed control. I'm not going to say a ton about weed control. There's lots of information available to you on the web and printed information through extension on weed control. But there is a lot that a landowner can do with weed control. I throw in this slide, shows in the center the Landowner of the Year winner, Max Blackham, on his property, who took it upon himself to do a ton of weed control, especially in the musk thistle on his property. And for years he was just out there with a gunny sack picking off the heads, and then he enlisted the help of Division of Forestry, Fire and State Lands area forester from the Moab office, Natalie Conlin there on the left, and Division of Forestry, Fire and State Lands Forest Health Specialist Colleen Kais, there pictured on the right, to introduce a beetle that biocontrol is the word we use for it, using a living organism to control the growth of another plant. And they introduced these beetles that colonate the head of the musk thistle, and he's had great success in knocking them back, way more effective than just popping off the heads in a gunny sack. And he's got his neighbors going on the project, and so a considerable success story up in Clear Creek with Max Blackham and weed control there. For more information on weed control, I recommend this fact sheet available on our website, Common Weeds of Utah Forests, and also just extension websites in general. Lots of weed control resources available to you. Most counties in Utah have a weed control board that can assist you with local information and how to approaches for controlling weeds on your property. Fuel breaks. I know there's several people attending today, arborists that were especially interested in fuel breaks, and appreciate your interest. So we'll spend a minute or few minutes on them today. This picture is from Central Utah, the town named Central, and around Central out there in the PJ, just north of St. George, they've done a shaded fuel break to surround the entire community, which is pictured just above the rooftops here. And you can see out in that picture there's still piles left from, this is just after it was done, since the photo was taken. I believe these piles have been burned. And so as opposed to just a complete fuel break where you cut every tree and piece of vegetation, a shaded fuel break can be almost as effective and is much more aesthetically pleasing. It's not the big scar across the land. It softens the edges of it and the look of it quite a bit. And this fuel break, in fact, was very effective at allowing it slowed down a wildfire enough so that crews could get in there and get a hold of the fire and take control of it as it was raging through this unbroken pinyon juniper forest, as you see in the top of the picture. When it hit the fuel break, it laid down on the ground, and firefighters get their equipment into it and knock it down and hold it there. And so it had a significant impact in this community of Central Utah. Shaded fuel breaks can be a good way to go. Often for fuel breaks we recommend a height of a minimum of 1.5 times the height of the predominant vegetation. So if your trees are 150 foot tall and you're putting in a fuel break, it should be at least 275 feet, 225 feet tall, something like that. So they have to be, or long I should say, they have to be fairly wide, but they can be shaded. Like this is another example of the one in Central. It's not just the most terrible thing to look at as compared to some other fuel breaks. So the shaded fuel break can be a good way to go. So you don't have to remove every bit of fuel, but it is important to separate the crowns of the trees so that the branches are not touching, so that if you envisioned a fire gobbling up one, those flames wouldn't necessarily be touching and impinging upon the crown of the next tree. Of course, if it's a wind-driven fire, that can change everything. It can blow right through most any fuel break. But when the crowns are separated and there's not much fuel down on the ground to carry a fire, it can be very effective. This one was mostly put in with a bull hog, a large masticating piece of equipment, and you can see in the bottom of the photo piles of the shredded material from the junipers that were removed and the pinyons that were removed in this process. Can be an effective way to go. In addition to just removing trees, we often recommend doing a lot of pruning of what we call ladder fuels. As in this picture, this is not the best pruning job. I imagine some of the arborists out there are cringing at the sight of a little bit too much branch was left on the one on the right and maybe cut too far into the one on the left. But again, on our extension website, we have fact sheets on pruning, mostly towards landscape trees, but those same principles apply, and a good pruning job. What we're trying to do is remove, again, ladder fuels. Those are the fuels that act like a ladder for the fire, that allow the fire to jump from the ground up into the canopies of the tree. And a canopy fire or a crown fire is much more difficult to control than a ground fire. So it helps the fire drop to the ground by removing these branches and ladder fuels within your fuel break. This is a similar example of a shaded fuel break with pruning done to it up on Reservation Ridge, and not a lot of fuel down on the ground. So if it wasn't up in the canopy already, it would provide firefighters a place to make a stand eventually, essentially. I want to take a little break here in the middle and see if we had any questions. Give folks a chance to ask questions via chat. Okay, again, ask questions at any time. We'll go on to the next, well, I guess this continuation of of fuel breaks. This is often within fuel breaks you want to pile your the leftover remains and pile. These are all hand piles underneath a canopy of trees that have been thinned out. Hand piling is a good way to go for creating these fuel breaks. These piles will be ignited and burned. When you have this many piles, you may consider igniting every other one or every third one and let some of the heat burn out of it, so we don't have that much heat pumped up into the canopy. Can scorch the crowns of the trees. But when you have piles spread out or away from trees, just let them rip as best you can. We have a question from John. What sort of legal issues should a homeowner be aware of when creating fuel breaks or property lines? Well, for fuel breaks and for property line, well, especially for fuel breaks, I'm assuming that all of the activities that would be done within your own forest land, within your own property. So outside of any possible municipal codes, there really aren't any legal issues with creating a fuel break. In fact, you can almost envision a situation where you would be more protected from legal troubles if your fuel break somehow prevented your neighbor's house from burning or something like that. I don't really know. And I'm certainly not a lawyer, so no specialist at legal issues. But it seems like it would, as long as all these activities are going on within your own property, there couldn't possibly be a problem with it that I could imagine. And as far as property lines, legal issues, yeah, there can be many legal issues. To prevent any of that, have a licensed surveyor lay out your property lines and then just maintain them over time. When I'm doing activities like this, though, along a property line with a neighbor, before I lay out a property line or just after I have, I'd like to invite that neighbor out. Let's walk that line. When can you go? Can you go on Saturday afternoon? And let's just walk it together and see if we agree. And if not, you just let them know that you did it to the best of your knowledge. And if you're going to be cutting trees along that boundary, often in the timber sale process, when we're logging, we use what we call a property line agreement with a landowner, just a simple one-line sort of form that you ask them to sign that indicates that you're going to be cutting trees along the indicated line. You're not claiming that's necessarily your property line, but that for the purposes of this project or this fuel break or whatever it is, you agree that you can cut trees to the line that has been marked. And that's one way to protect yourself from legal issues when creating fuel breaks, cutting trees along property lines. Thank you for that question. Slash disposal, a little bit of a continuation of the last topic, but slightly different. Often, as a landowner, you're left with perhaps I've seen many landowners left with poor logging jobs where the slash did not ever get cleaned up, and it wasn't in the contract that the logger was going to do it. And just sometimes we have other things, beetle kill, wind throw. There's lots of reasons we have slash piles left on the property, and I encourage landowners to do their best to get those burned up. They offer some wildlife habitat for small critters, and a few here and there is a good thing, but when there's a lot of them, it can be a bit of a hazard as far as fire danger, and it's also just an eyesore. So and often slash piles are at the end of a road or along the road where the landowner sees the property the most. So with some hard work and some care, a landowner can often get rid of even the largest slash piles piles over time. I recommend letting a pile like this. This is not a bad pile. It's tall. I like them when they're really tall, like a haystack should be, without too much dirt inside of them. This one I can see that there's an old gas jug in there. I'd pull that out and dispose of that properly. But then let it heat up in the sun and dry out all summer, and then sometime in September, before we get our fall rains and snows, cover it over with a piece of plastic, or there's special material that can be purchased specifically for pile covering and burning. You can leave on and burn up, but just a cheap piece of visqueen over top of it, and wait until you get the first inch of rain or snow in the fall, when the fuel surrounding the piles are wet and won't carry a fire, and then remove that cover and try and get a fire going. Just start small, a little campfire going down inside of it. You can if you have a lot of piles, you can use a napalm or a Lumagel mix that a landowner could purchase, I think from a company like Forestry Suppliers or Ben Meadows, and just a Ziploc baggie full of that, and then put it on a shovel and try and get it deep inside the pile, and then light it, so you got a heat source building inside of there, and then over time just keep working the pile. Ideally, a big pile like this, you'd have a piece of equipment to work it, but it can be done by hand. A lot more work, hands and shovels and rake, and tending these piles through the process of burning over a couple days, or sometimes even weeks, and in some cases I've even seen months. Just tending it and pushing the tinder back in, you get a good, clean, well-consumed burn. This pile sat up in was at the time private land in Franklin Basin, just above us up Logan Canyon, and it didn't get burned for 10 years after this area was logged. As you can see, all the fine fuels have fallen off, and it's an old pile, but still it can be burned. And two summers ago, a crew went up and burned a whole series of piles up along this road, and now you can't even see that there were piles there at all. So some hard work, and these guys didn't have any equipment, but they had a strong crew to knock it out, and successful in burning even very old piles. We have a comment from Amy. Thank you. We tried that in the plastic that's supposed to burn, and it was awful. It didn't burn at all. So probably best just to just use some cheap visqueen that you can get at the local hardware store, and remove it as best you can before you actually ignite the pile. Thanks for that comment, Amy. And sometimes piles can look like a mountain. I mean, they can be bigger than a house. I've burned lots of piles that were way bigger than the pretty big house that I live in. And but you can do it. Make sure, I'd enlist, again, the help of the Division of Forestry, Fire and State Lands, the area forester, perhaps a local fire warden, for advice on especially large piles and when to ignite them, and they can actually come out and help you ignite them in many cases and help you clean it all up. But as long as the pile is not too dirty, there's not too much dirt in it, and it's mostly wood, you can do pretty good at cleaning them up. Here, this tree off in the background could be a little bit close and could be scorched, and I know we often worry about that, but there's mitigating things that you can do, like try lighting the pile first on the side where the tree is that you're most worried about, and then it will back away theoretically from that, and so you won't have so much heat on that tree at once. So mitigating things that you can do, just light the pile more slowly on that side, those sorts of things. Let it burn away from it before you really get the whole thing burning. But in general, you kind of just got to go for it, and if the tree gets damaged, consider taking out that tree at the end. Wanted to mention, certainly need to check local, again with the Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands, or local fire marshals on permits and burning regulations. There's times out in the counties that you're allowed to burn and times that you're not, and each county is different, each municipality is different, so check with your local sources before you light the match. Riparian restoration. There's a number of things that a landowner can do to help restore riparian areas to improve wildlife habitat on their property. Protecting wildlife riparian areas, you can plant willows and alders and lots of different seed that usually needs to be scarified in with a rake. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on riparian restoration, but it's certainly something that a landowner can go a long way towards doing. Often riparian damage comes from livestock right in the creek bottom, like here, tearing up, when we have rough banks like this with no vegetation on them. It's a pretty good indicator that we're putting some mud or silt in the stream, which is what we're trying to avoid. So fencing livestock out of sensitive areas might be considered as a means of riparian restoration. I didn't get a title on this one, or it disappeared, but moving on to road maintenance, which can be very much tied to riparian restoration, because here we have this water going across the road and creating this channel or gully, is ditched, tearing out this edge of the road, and all that material is now down in the creek that's right next to the side of this road. So it's doing riparian damage. So by maintaining your roads and your culverts and the drainage on your roads, it's an indirect way of doing riparian restoration on your property. Anytime you see water running down your road damage is happening. This water is taking, it's causing a gully, it's bringing the fines, the small materials that are in the road, into the creek bottom, where they settle into the gravel and ruin spawning habitat. That's where the fish like to spawn, lay their eggs, down in that nice clean gravel in the creek bottom. So this is doing direct damage to the nearby creek. So this is the kind of thing, when you're out driving your property, when you see gullies like this after a rain or during a rain, you know that you could spend some time with a shovel, a firefighting tool, like a pick-like tool. It's called a Pulaski. It's great for digging out water bars and channels across roads to get the water from running down the road and just channel it off into the nearby vegetation, so it's filtered and not continuing to run down the road, causing more and more damage. Like here, the water's been running down through this side of the road for a period of time. Tremendous damage to the road and to local stream beds and fish habitats. So one of the most important things landowners can do is keep a good eye on their road systems. Consider this is a culvert that's been plugged up, partially plugged by logs and debris and silt. Clean out any culverts that you have. Try to keep them marked and remove debris like this. If your culverts have been driven over like this one, unsquash them or replace them. This one only has 10% of its true capacity, so during a big gully washer storm, what will happen is it will all fill up in front of the culvert and then start pouring over the road, and then eventually, if unmitigated, I've seen 2-lane roads completely paved, nice high quality highways completely ripped out from a poorly maintained culvert. So really critical to maintain culverts for road maintenance and for protecting watersheds. This is a water bar, actually on a skid trail, a side trail off of a road, but just kind of shows how, looking downstream towards my truck, you can imagine that if the water was running down this road that we were on, it would hit this water bar and then be channeled off into the vegetation on the right. So it's a little swale before it and a pile of dirt behind it, and as long as they don't get driven through, they can last quite a long time. A very effective way for maintaining your roads. Again, can be done with a landowner, by a landowner with a pick and a shovel. And for more information on this, and more than you can imagine, we did a conference on road building a few years ago, and we have it archived on our website, and Olivia is going to find that for me now and put that up in our chat pod if you'd like to see where to go for a full presentation